Are you still afraid? Psalm 27. Divine prayer is your ultimate shield. Claim undisturbed peace. Fear is an unwelcome guest that sneaks into the human mind, echoing doubts, insecurities, and anxieties that paralyze progress and cloud vision. Have you ever felt its grip tight, suffocating, and persistent? That quiet voice that says, "You're not enough," or that loud whisper that demands, "You will fail." You know it, don't you? The kind of fear that keeps you awake at night, replaying the worst-case scenarios that haven't even happened. But what if I told you there's a way to quiet the storm? Not just fight fear temporarily, but disarm it entirely. What if I told you that you already hold the shield, but you might not realize how to use it yet? Psalm 27 isn't just ancient poetry. It's a divine weapon, forged in wisdom and held by faith. A prayer that transforms fear into bold confidence, replacing unease with an undisturbed peace that cannot be shaken by life's chaos. Today, you'll uncover what makes these words so powerful, why humanity's greatest fears are no match for a faith rooted in divine promises, and how this chapter of Scripture isn't just a relic of the past, but a key to living fearlessly in today's uncertain world. Close your eyes and imagine for just a moment. No more restless nights, no more second-guessing yourself, and no more suffocating worry. Picture the strength that comes when your foundation cannot be moved. The peace that lasts because you know no matter the trouble you face, your shield is the strength of God Himself. Doesn't that sound like the life you've been longing for? Stay with me, because in this exploration of Psalm 27, you'll discover exactly how to wield this prayer as your ultimate shield. This isn't just theology for scholars or distant believers. This is real wisdom, here and now, for your daily struggles and your quiet fears. Psalm 27:1 begins with these words: "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" That question holds the first secret. We will unlock fear's greatest enemy isn't courage. It isn't denial, it's trust. Would you dare to imagine what your life could look like if you lived from a place of unshakable, unwavering trust? Let me guide you step by step as we bridge the timeless wisdom of David's psalm with tools for modern resilience in an anxious world. We'll expose the roots of fear in our minds, uncover why Psalm 27 offers not just temporary solace, but lasting solutions, and leave you equipped with a confident spirit, ready to take on whatever life throws your way. Fear is a thief, but peace is within your grasp. The question is, are you ready to claim it? Setting the stage, the reality of modern fear. Fear is no longer just an instinctual response to physical danger, has become a quiet, constant presence in modern life. It hides itself in subtle ways, sometimes in the form of a persistent worry or a nagging sense that something could go wrong at any moment. Other times, it feels like a storm roaring through our minds, consuming every thought and leaving no space for peace. Its origins may be invisible, but its effects are unmistakable, stealing sleep, clarity, ambition, and even hope. And yet, fear isn't always loud. Sometimes, it comes disguised as logic, convincing us to hold back, to play small, or to doubt everything good in front of us. If we're honest, much of modern life fuels this uneasiness. We live in a restless world, overwhelmed by rapid change and unpredictable challenges. Financial uncertainty leaves many paralyzed by thoughts of what if I lose everything. In relationships, fear whispers that we may never be truly loved, or that a treasured connection could be lost. Society places pressure on us to constantly achieve, yet fear of failure holds us back from taking risks. Even small decisions can carry the weight of fear, making us second-guess ourselves, trapped in hypothetical outcomes that may never come true. Psychologists call it the age of anxiety, and it's not hard to see why. The tools designed to connect us, digital platforms and endless streams of information, often leave us feeling more disconnected than ever. Social media compares us to lives seemingly free of struggle, amplifying the fear of not being enough. News cycles bombard us with troubles at every corner of the globe, reinforcing the idea that chaos always lurks nearby. Fear, once a momentary survival response, has become a chronic, unseen weight borne by millions every day. What makes this fear so dangerous isn't just its prevalence, but its reach. It seeps into every part of our being. Fear clouds judgment and paralyzes action. It drains our energy, robs us of peace, and often stops us from even trying. Its whispers convince us we are unworthy, that the mountain ahead is too steep to climb, or that the safety of inaction is the best choice. And yet, the more space we give it, the more it grows, subtly shaping our thoughts, behaviors, and decisions until it feels inescapable. But fear didn't come with modernity. It existed long before today's complexities. Even in biblical times, human hearts wrestled with fear just as we do now. The difference lies in how that fear was approached. King David, the writer of Psalm 27, knew fear intimately. His life was filled with threats, pursued by enemies, betrayed by those closest to him, and isolated in moments of profound personal struggle. He faced battles that demanded not only physical strength, but emotional resilience. Yet instead of succumbing to these feelings or denying his fear, David turned to something much greater: his trust in God. Psalm 27 isn't merely a poetic composition. It's a declaration of unwavering confidence in the power and protection of a God who doesn't fail. Imagine, for a moment, the courage it takes to say, "Whom shall I fear?" while an army surrounds you, or to proclaim undisturbed peace while knowing full well the chaos pressing in from all sides. David's challenge to fear wasn't rooted in arrogance or blindness to danger. It was anchored in a truth deeper than circumstances. He didn't wait for fear to disappear. Instead, he chose to replace it with faith, seeing himself shielded by the presence of God. The confidence David portrays in this psalm is unlike anything most of us ever experience. So how could a man, living under the constant threat of death, speak with such bold assurance? The answer lies in his relationship with God, an unshakable belief that even in his darkest moments, God's light would never fail to guide and protect him. The psalm's opening words are a declaration of everything fear is powerless against. "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, whom shall I be afraid?" David's certainty challenges us because it goes beyond human logic. It shifts the focus away from external chaos and firmly onto God's character, unwavering, immovable, and faithful. The same truths that sustained David in his time of turmoil are still capable of silencing fear today. While fear convinces us to rely on ourselves, Psalm 27 reminds us to turn toward the only source of unshakable peace. Certainly, life is unpredictable and struggles will come. But David's words invite us to see these challenges differently. Our battles, no matter how overwhelming, are no match for the presence of God. This psalm, though written thousands of years ago, speaks directly to the modern soul. It reminds us that fear, no matter how loud, is never the last word. By reflecting on the timeless truths of Psalm 27, it becomes clear that fear isn't a sign of weakness, but an opportunity to lean deeper into God's strength. David didn't live fearlessly because his enemies disappeared. He lived fearlessly because he trusted the one who was always greater than those enemies. And so, the same decision lies before you. Will you let fear dictate your steps, or will you allow the steady promises of God to guide you through the storms? What makes Psalm 27 unique? There are countless verses in the Bible that offer comfort and strength, yet Psalm 27 stands apart. It is more than a poetic expression of faith. It's a battle cry of the soul, a declaration of trust that rises even in the face of life's darkest moments. But what makes Psalm 27 so unique? What is it about these words that have resonated across centuries, offering courage to those burdened by anxiety and overwhelmed by fear? Psalm 27 is unique because it addresses the full spectrum of human fear. It confronts the worries spawned by external dangers, enemies, threats, and tangible crises. At the same time, it speaks to the internal struggles that loom even larger: loneliness, uncertainty, and the quiet doubts we carry about our ability to face what lies ahead. David's words remind us that fear does not merely reside in our circumstances. It grows in our minds, thrives in our hearts, and sways our decisions. But Psalm 27 offers not just reflection, it presents a solution, one that transcends time and circumstance. Right from its opening, Psalm 27 pierces through the suffocating weight of fear. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, whom shall I be afraid? These are no passive words, they are a challenge to fear itself. In these lines, David rejects the dominance of worry and declares God's presence as more powerful than any threat. The mention of light reveals something profound. Light doesn't eliminate darkness, it simply overpowers it. Where there is light, confusion disappears and clarity reigns. David is not saying that fear won't exist, rather, he's saying that fear loses its grip when the light of God is near. But Psalm 27 doesn't stop with just reassurance. It reveals an active strategy for dealing with fear. David doesn't just describe God as salvation. He describes him as a stronghold, a fortress, impenetrable and safe. Imagine standing in the center of an ancient fort, surrounded on all sides by high, unbreakable walls. Even as enemies gather at the gates, you are untouchable inside. In the same way, David invites us to see life not as something we must weather on our own, but as a place where God's presence acts as our defense. Fear becomes powerless when we understand that we are surrounded by something greater than the chaos outside. What makes this psalm even more remarkable is its balance between courage and vulnerability. David is no stranger to fear. The psalm reflects moments of doubt and longing, spaces where his humanity is undeniable. He's clear in verse 3, saying, "Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident." His confidence isn't ignorance. David knows the stakes. Fear was a real and present force in his life, but it never overshadowed his trust in the God who stood with him. This is a pivotal lesson for us today. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but rather the ability to choose trust in the midst of it. Another unique aspect of this psalm is the way it elevates God's presence as the ultimate source of peace. David's greatest desire isn't for his enemies to vanish or for his hardships to suddenly disappear. It's something far simpler and yet far more profound. "One thing I ask from the Lord," he writes in verse 4, "this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple." It's here that David reveals the true key to triumph over fear. Not a change in circumstance, but a change in focus. Peace doesn't come from avoiding the battles of life, it flourishes in God's presence. This shift in perspective is arguably what makes Psalm 27 so powerful. Fear thrives when we dwell on what might go wrong, but trust grows when we dwell on the unchanging goodness of God. David asks to remain in God's house, not as an escape, but as a posture of dependence. Fear demands control. It tells us to be louder, stronger, and more resistant to the pains of life. But this psalm dismantles that mindset. Instead of facing fear with force, David faces it by surrendering to something greater. Finally, Psalm 27 doesn't merely speak to individual fears, reflects universal truths about the nature of faith and resilience. The psalm bridges the gap between the poetic and the practical. It acknowledges fear's grip while offering a divine solution rooted not in fleeting comforts, but in eternal truths. And that, perhaps, is what makes it timeless. Across generations, this psalm has been a source of strength for those overwhelmed by life's weight. Its message is as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. David's words remind us that no matter how modern our fears seem, the solution is the same. Trust in God, who is light in the darkness, salvation in the face of destruction, and an unshakable stronghold when life feels anything but stable. As you encounter the depths of Psalm 27, consider this. Where do you turn when fear strikes? Is your mind consumed by the size of the problem, or are you grounded in the presence of the God who is far greater? The psalm's unique ability isn't just in addressing fear, but in inviting us to shift our perspective entirely. In this holy fortress, fear has no power, and peace becomes your natural state. In the next chapter, we'll explore the connection between fear, the human mind, and God's transformative power, a bridge between faith and the intricate workings of your inner self. Fear begins in the mind. Fear begins long before we see its effects. Before it paralyzes action or steals peace, it takes root in the mind. It starts as a whisperer thought, an imagined scenario, a possibility, and steadily grows until it consumes every corner of our being. The mind, in its incredible complexity, is both our greatest gift and our greatest battlefield. It is here, in the unseen workings of our thoughts, that fear gains its strength and begins to dominate our lives. To understand fear, we must look at where it grows and how Psalm 27 offers the power to uproot it. Science tells us that fear emerges from the amygdala, a small part of the brain responsible for processing threats. This fight-or-flight system is designed to protect us, warning us about danger and giving us the means to survive. But in the modern world, this ancient system often works against us. Instead of responding to physical threats, it reacts to hypothetical ones, deadlines that feel overwhelming, conflicts that haven't happened, or failures that might never occur. The body, however, doesn't distinguish between a real attack and an imagined one. Stress hormones surge through us just the same. Fear becomes a chronic presence, not because danger is constant, but because the mind allows it to linger. This is why fear feels so powerful. It's deeply wired into us. But here's the truth. Fear isn't just a biological response. It's a spiritual attack. Left unchecked, those whispers in the mind grow louder and more convincing. They shape how we see the world, but even more dangerously, they shape how we see ourselves. Fear isn't content to simply warn of external threats. It attacks our confidence, our beliefs, and our faith. It tells us we are unprepared, unworthy, and unsupported. It tells us to shrink back, to rely on our own strength, and to face life alone. How often have we allowed these thoughts to define our reality? How many moments have been stolen from us because we believed the lies fear planted? While science explains fear biologically, Psalm 27 reveals its deeper spiritual roots. When David begins this psalm with the words, The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? He isn't describing an absence of fear, he's naming its antidote. Fear's power begins in the mind, but so does its defeat. David is showing us that the battle is not fought with strength or denial, but with the deliberate choice to fill our minds with the truth of who God is. Psalm 27 interrupts the cycle of fear by confronting it with light, salvation, and strength. David knew, just as we do, that fear thrives in the dark. In the absence of hope or clarity, fear flourishes, but light is fear's greatest enemy. When David calls God his light, he is reminding us that clarity, guidance, and truth come from God alone. Fear says, "You are lost, and you don't know the way." God's light answers, "You are found, and I am with you." This is where the transformation begins, not when fear disappears, but when God's presence overtakes it. What makes Psalm 27 so practical is that it doesn't stop at inspiration. It goes deeper, revealing a method for reshaping your thought life. In verse 4, David writes, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." He reduces his desire to one single focus, being with God. Why? Because proximity to God realigns the mind. Time spent in his presence uproots fear and replaces it with peace. The human mind cannot focus on fear and faith at the same time. One will always dominate. David's commitment to dwell in the house of the Lord reveals that conquering fear isn't about mustering courage, it's about redirecting attention. This balance between psychology and faith is profound. Today, we know how practices like prayer, meditation, and gratitude physically change the brain. Science shows that these habits increase levels of serotonin and dopamine, the neurotransmitters responsible for feelings of peace and happiness. Psalm 27 offers the same wisdom, teaching us that focusing on God changes not just our circumstances, but the way our minds handled those circumstances. The promises of God don't just inspire, they heal the very structure of our thought life. Fear may start in the mind, but so does faith. It's in meditating on verses like "The Lord is the stronghold of my life, whom shall I be afraid?" that we reshape fear-filled pathways into ones grounded in peace. Something extraordinary happens when you allow these truths to take root. Fear's grip loosens. You begin to see it for what it is, not a reflection of your reality, but a distortion of it. Psalm 27 equips us to see past the lies, exposing the light of God as stronger than any shadow cast by fear. David's confidence wasn't arrogance, it was the result of dwelling in a mindset shaped by trust in God. The same is true for us. We will encounter fear, but we are not prisoners to it. The mind is the starting point for both fear and faith. Psalm 27 invites us to choose which one will guide our lives. In the next chapter, we will explore how this psalm breaks the barriers of doubt and offers a verse-by-verse guide to harnessing confidence, courage, and strength. The same mind that fear tries to control can be renewed by God's presence, giving you the tools to live boldly no matter the challenges ahead. The verse-by-verse power of Psalm 27. Psalm 27 is not merely a poetic composition. It is a roadmap for courage, a guide that takes the turbulent human heart and points it toward divine peace. Every verse has a unique resonance, collectively forming a foundation of strength, hope, and unwavering trust. To truly appreciate the depth of Psalm 27, we must walk through its verses, uncovering the layered truths designed to disarm fear and inspire bold confidence. The psalm begins with a declaration that silences anxiety before it gains ground. "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, Of whom shall I be afraid? These are not empty words. They are a statement of allegiance, a refusal to believe the lies fear tries to sow. Light holds profound significance here. Light reveals what is true, removing the shadows where fear hides. It doesn't erase the challenges, but it illuminates the path forward, showing that God's presence will always lead the way. Salvation, on the other hand, speaks to ultimate rescue. No struggle, no failure, no enemy is more powerful than the God who saves. And finally, the stronghold serves as a metaphor for safety, a fortress against life's battles. These words are not an abstract comfort, they are an armor that David wore in real danger, and they remain a defense for us today. Fear may knock on the door, but it cannot enter where God resides. The psalm continues, transitioning from bold confidence to specific scenarios that could provoke terror. David proclaims, "When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident." Consider this imagery: armies, attacks, chaos on all sides. These are the kind of threats that should cause the bravest soul to waver. Yet David stands firm. Why? Because he knows the power of God is far bigger than the size of the army before him. The psalm is a reminder that confidence in God does not depend on the absence of conflict. It depends on the presence of His protection. The louder the chaos grows, the greater the opportunity to stand on the unshakable foundation of His strength. Verse 4 shifts the tone, revealing David's deepest desire. "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple." After describing fearsome external threats, why does David turn inward to this single request? Because in the face of fear, the ultimate solution isn't physical rescue, it's spiritual realignment. David's longing to dwell in God's house is not about location, it's about proximity. He desires to remain close to God, to fix his gaze on God's beauty, and to seek Him above all else. This verse exposes one of fear's greatest weaknesses. Fear thrives when we focus on the problem, but it starves when we focus on God. David teaches us that peace is found not by removing threats, but by anchoring ourselves in the presence of the divine. The following verses expand on this theme, shifting the focus from fear to trust in God's active involvement. "For in the day of trouble He will keep me safe in His dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of His sacred tent and set me high upon a rock." These words capture the faithfulness of God, who doesn't merely observe our struggles, but actively protects His children. When fear tries to tell us we're vulnerable, these verses remind us that God Himself is our sanctuary. The imagery of being hidden in a sacred tent emphasizes intimacy and care, while being set high on a rock suggests a position not just of safety but of victory. Together, these verses reaffirm that God doesn't just defend His people, He elevates them beyond the reach of the attacks meant to harm them. David's confidence reaches new heights in verse 6, where he declares, "Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At His sacred tent I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord." This joy is not circumstantial. David's gratitude comes not after the battle is over, but in the midst of it. His praise is an act of defiance against fear, a proclamation that God is already victorious. This verse challenges us to rise above our circumstances, not in denial of pain, but in anticipation of the deliverance God promises for those who trust Him. As the psalm progresses, the theme of vulnerability begins to resurface, but not as weakness, rather as an invitation to draw closer to God. David prays, "Hear my voice when I call, Lord, be merciful to me and answer me." Beneath his confidence, we see the reality of dependence. Even the boldest faith still seeks God's reassurance. David goes on to say, "My heart says of you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me." This raw honesty reminds us that faith does not require perfection, it requires pursuit. What makes Psalm 27 so beautiful is its authenticity. It does not paint over the struggle with blind optimism, but shows us that even in moments of doubt, God's presence is never beyond reach. Finally, David concludes with an unshakable truth. "I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. These closing words encapsulate the heartbeat of Psalm 27, trust that transcends circumstances. To wait for the Lord is not to sit passively, but to live in expectation, knowing that God is faithful to fulfill his promises. David's confidence is rooted not in what he sees, but in who God is. His declaration assures us that no matter how long the storm rages, divine goodness will prevail. Psalm 27 is a verse-by-verse guide to dismantling fear. It shifts the focus from the invisible lies of fear to the immovable truths of God. Each verse offers a layer of strength: light in the darkness, protection in the battle, shelter in the storm, and victory over every enemy. In this holy anthem, fear surrenders, courage awakens, and the soul finds its refuge. In the next chapter, we'll explore how fear and faith cannot coexist, and how choosing one inevitably silences the other. Fear and faith cannot coexist. Fear and faith share one common denominator: both demand to be believed. Fear whispers its lies into the deepest parts of your mind, weaving its narrative until it becomes a lens through which you see the world. It feeds on uncertainty, magnifying risks and minimizing your ability to overcome them. Faith, however, offers a radically different story. It does not deny the reality of struggle, but it rewrites the ending entirely. These two forces, fear and faith, are not just opposites, they are incompatible. Whichever one you feed will eventually overshadow the other. Fear thrives on control. It tells you that your security lies in what you can hold on to, manage, and predict. It promises that if you can anticipate every scenario, prepare for every threat, and protect yourself from every harm, you will find peace. But fear is a liar. No matter how much control you think you have, fear demands more. Its appetite is insatiable. It convinces you that you are alone, that failure is inevitable, and that your best efforts will never be enough. Worse, it isolates you, pulling you away from the very source of strength that can silence it entirely. Faith, on the other hand, invites surrender. It does not require you to wrestle with every problem on your own. It invites you to let go of the illusion of control and place your trust in a power far greater than yourself. Faith calls you to trust that, even in the absence of clear answers, you are not abandoned. It reminds you that the storms of life do not define you or your future. They are simply a backdrop against which God's power is revealed. Where fear demands control, faith demands trust. The two cannot coexist because one is rooted in self-reliance, while the other is grounded in divine reliance. Psalm 27 captures this tension in a profound way. David does not deny the presence of fear. Rather, he stands before it and declares a greater truth. When he proclaims, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" he is not claiming to be fearless by nature. He is choosing to place faith where fear seeks to take root. Fear says, "What if everything goes wrong?" Faith responds, "Even if it does, God's strength will sustain me." Fear says, "You are alone." Faith reminds you that God is a fortress, a stronghold, an unshakable refuge. Consider the battles David faced, not metaphorical conflicts, but real, life-threatening situations. His enemies were not hypothetical. They were armies, spears, and individuals who sought to destroy him. And yet, Psalm 27 is permeated with confidence. Why? Because David knew that while fear paints the picture of defeat, faith guarantees victory. Faith does not mean the absence of conflict. It means choosing to trust in God's power rather than your own abilities. That trust is what makes fear crumble, not because challenges disappear, but because they lose their authority over your mindset. In the spiritual battle between fear and faith, what you focus on determines which will dominate. Fear grows when you focus on the size of your problem. Faith flourishes when you focus on the greatness of God. David understood this principle deeply, which is why he wrote in Psalm 27:2-4, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." David's priority wasn't the removal of his enemies or the end of his battles. It was closeness to God. Why? Because fear cannot coexist with awe. When you truly see God for who He is, His power, His faithfulness, His unchanging love, fear shrinks into insignificance. Faith invites you into a mindset of abundance, not scarcity. Fear always operates from the belief that there is never enough, not enough strength, not enough time, not enough certainty. Faith, however, reminds you that with God, there is always enough. Faith calls you to lift your eyes beyond your circumstances and focus on the God who holds your life in His hands. It invites you to stop striving for control and instead rest in the assurance that the one who created the universe is guiding your steps. But here's a critical truth. Faith is not passive. It is a choice, made daily and often in the midst of uncertainty. It is not simply a feeling of hope, but an active decision to trust. When David says in Psalm 27:14, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord," he acknowledges that faith takes strength. To wait on God is not to sit in idleness. It is to actively refuse fear's lies while anticipating God's movement. Fear may still surface, but faith arms you with the courage to confront it. Remember this: fear thrives in isolation, but faith flourishes in community and connection with God. When David speaks of dwelling in God's house, he is pointing to intimacy and relationship. Faith is most powerful when it is rooted in communion with the divine, a distant belief in God's existence, but an immediate and personal reliance on His presence. Fear fades in the light of that relationship because it cannot survive where trust has taken hold. Psalm 27 invites you to make a choice. Fear will always try to creep into your mind, taking every opportunity to magnify the chaos around you. But faith offers a different path, one of surrender, confidence, and peace. It begins with a simple but profound step: to trust. When you choose to dwell in God's presence, to focus on His power rather than your own limitations, fear loses its grip. The two cannot coexist because faith leaves no space for fear to grow. The question is not whether fear will arise, The question is where your focus will be when it does. Will you choose to believe fear's lies, or will you stand firm in the truth of God's promises? In the next chapter, we will explore how Psalm 27 offers practical guidance to claim divine peace in your everyday life, arming you with tools to turn fear into faith at every step. Practical guide to claim divine peace. Psalm 27 is not just a song of confidence or a poetic anthem of trust. It is a guide to experiencing God's peace in every corner of life. Divine peace, the kind that cannot be shaken by external chaos or internal turmoil, is not something you stumble upon. It is something you actively claim, daily and intentionally. Fear may knock at the door of your mind, but peace is always available when you learn to focus on the presence of God and implement the practices that align your heart with His truths. The great gift of Psalm 27 is that it doesn't just tell you about peace, shows you how to live in it. The first step in claiming divine peace is embracing the discipline of prayer. David begins the psalm by calling upon God, declaring Him as his light and salvation. This declaration is more than a statement, it's a prayer rooted in faith. Prayer is not about bringing God information He doesn't know. It's about bringing Him your full attention. It is an act of surrender, a moment where you align your fear-filled thoughts with the truth of God's power. To pray, as David does, is to make a choice to see the world through God's eyes rather than the lens of worry. Prayer reorients us, pulling us back from the endless stream of what-ifs and grounding us in the certainty of God's presence. Next, Psalm 27 teaches us the power of meditation. In verse 4, David says, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple." This isn't just a poetic wish, it's a practical strategy for peace. To dwell in the house of the Lord is to dedicate time to sit with God, intentionally focusing on His goodness and promises. Meditation allows us to counteract the noise of fear by filling our minds with thoughts of God's faithfulness. When you spend time dwelling in His presence, you are actively creating space for peace to grow. It's not about escaping reality, it's about equipping your soul to face it with clarity and confidence. Gratitude is another essential practice we find in Psalm 27. David's heart overflows with thankfulness, even in the middle of his battles. "I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord." Gratitude is not a passive emotion. It is an active weapon against fear. It shifts your perspective by reminding you of what God has already done, instead of focusing on what you lack or what may go wrong. Fear narrows your vision, convincing you that the present situation is all that matters. Gratitude expands that vision, showing you the countless ways God has been faithful in the past and will continue to be. Even in moments of uncertainty, gratitude creates a fertile ground for divine peace to take root. Claiming divine peace also requires trust in God's perfect timing. In verse 14, David writes, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." Waiting can feel passive, but in the spiritual sense, it is one of the most active forms of trust. Waiting for the Lord means resisting the urge to act in fear or desperation. It's about refusing to allow fear's urgency to dictate your decisions. Divine peace flourishes when we stop trying to force outcomes and instead trust that God's timing is always right. While fear demands immediate answers, faith teaches us that peace lies in God's unfolding plan. Another key lesson from Psalm 27 is the importance of dwelling in God's protection. David doesn't just acknowledge the dangers around him. He shifts his focus to the shelter God provides. He writes, "For in the day of trouble He will keep me safe in His dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of His sacred tent and set me high upon a rock, in a world full of uncertainties." This imagery is a powerful reminder that God's ultimate shield is not just defensive, it elevates you. When fear tries to overwhelm you, visualizing God as your shelter can quiet your mind and give you the stability to move forward. Reflect on times when you felt overwhelmed by challenges. Then imagine what it means to rest in the sacred tent of His promises, knowing you are completely protected. As you practice aligning your soul to God's peace, you must also train your mind to resist the lies of fear. Psalm 27 rewires your mindset through its declarations. When David says, "The Lord is my light," he is directly countering fear's lie that life is all darkness. When he proclaims that God is his salvation, he is rejecting fear's narrative that safety comes only from human effort. These declarations are more than poetic. They are tools you can use every day. Speak them out loud. Replace your fear-filled thoughts with these truths. The more you declare them, the more your mind will begin to accept peace as your natural state. Crucially, Psalm 27 reminds us that divine peace isn't circumstantial. It's not about waiting for life to calm down. It's about finding calm at the center of your soul, because your confidence is not in your own strength, but in God's. When David says, "Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear," he is not denying the reality of the danger. He is redefining it. The presence of God doesn't eliminate challenges, but it gives you the assurance that you are never alone within them. The practices laid out in Psalm 27 prayer, meditation, gratitude, trust, and declarations of truth are not distant spiritual concepts. They are tangible steps you can take every day. These habits don't just reduce fear, they replace it with a resilient peace that cannot be shaken by circumstances. Fear may try to creep back in, but when you are grounded in these practices, it will find no place to take hold. In the next chapter, we will hear how these truths play out in real life. Through personal testimonies and stories of resilience, we will see the undeniable impact of trusting God as your shield. When you put these practices into action, fear isn't just silence. It is replaced entirely by an unshakable faith that transforms every facet of life. Testimonial or story time. When I conquered fear with God, there's something undeniable about the power of a story. It goes beyond theory or abstract ideas. It brings truth to life. When fear feels overwhelming, hearing how someone else walked through the fire and came out stronger can ignite a new level of hope. Stories have the ability to remind us that we are not alone and that God's promises are not theoretical, they are real, living, and active. In this chapter, we step into the heartbeat of Psalm 27 by hearing how its truths have shifted lives from fear to faith. Imagine a woman overwhelmed by life's demands, standing on the edge of despair. This isn't centuries ago, it's here and now. She's balancing bills that keep piling up, working long hours to support her family, constantly feeling the weight of not being enough. Her nights are restless, her heart filled with the quiet dread of what if tomorrow gets worse. The fear grows louder every day, screaming that collapse is inevitable. She opens her Bible one night out of desperation. She's looking for anything to tell her she's not alone in this struggle. Her eyes fall on Psalm 27. At first the words feel distant. "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" Her instinct is to dismiss them, too overwhelmed by her reality to feel their power. But something encourages her to read the verse again, slower this time, then again. The rhythm of those words begins to push back against the noise in her mind. She closes her eyes and whispers the words out loud, her voice trembling. As she repeats them, something stirs in her. Small flicker of courage she hasn't felt in months. It's not that all her problems disappear, but the weight of them begins to shift. You see, her circumstances haven't changed yet, but something profound happens. Her focus shifts. She realizes that fear has been lying to her, magnifying the chaos and minimizing the presence of a God who never left. Another powerful story emerges from the life of a young entrepreneur who was drowning under the fear of failure. He had given everything: his time, his money, his relationships to build something he believed in. But setbacks and rejection piled up, and the voice of fear began to poison his thoughts. You're not good enough. You'll never succeed. This will end in humiliation. Every decision became paralyzed by these doubts, suffocating both his creativity and his faith. Exhausted and desperate, he sought counsel from a friend, who gently placed a Bible in his hands and said, "Start with Psalm 27. Reluctant at first, he finally opened the page. The words hit him like a tidal wave. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident." He couldn't dismiss how those words felt directed at him, as if they were written for his own struggles. Suddenly, he understood. The battles he faced weren't just external, they were battles of the mind. Fear had disguised itself as logic, convincing him to believe in his own inadequacy. But those verses, those powerful declarations, reminded him that his confidence didn't need to come from himself. It came from the God who was his stronghold, the God who didn't abandon him when rejection came knocking. Day by day, as he meditated on Psalm 27, he felt the weight of fear lifting. It didn't mean the challenges disappeared, but his spirit became rooted in something far stronger. His path forward became clear, not because his obstacles went away, but because his trust overshadowed his fear. Even someone as universally admired as Martin Luther, the great reformer, turned to Psalm 27 during dark times, facing opposition from some of the most powerful forces of his era. His life was frequently threatened, and fear haunted him at every turn. Luther called Psalm 27 one of his greatest sources of inspiration, reciting it often to remind himself that the movements of men could never overpower the sovereignty of God. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" These words carried him through sleepless nights and relentless attacks, grounding him in a truth that others couldn't take away. Even when surrounded by danger, his soul was safe in God's hands. But let's bring this closer to you. Maybe your story isn't about armies surrounding you or life-threatening dangers like David and Luther faced. But fear feels just as real in your world. Fear of losing a loved one, fear of rejection, fear that life's burden is too heavy to carry. Whatever your fear may be, the same truths that anchored David, the entrepreneur, the struggling woman, and Martin Luther can anchor you too. Their stories didn't end with perfect circumstances. They ended with peace, a peace that allowed them to walk through fire without being consumed by it. Psalm 27 shines in these testimonies because it doesn't provide a solution rooted in human achievement. It offers a shield rooted in divine power. Stories like these remind us that while fear speaks loudly, God's presence can silence it. They teach us that fear doesn't need to be fought with force, it needs to be starved of its fuel. And that fuel is the belief that you're in this struggle alone. Every story echoes the same truth. Fear's greatest deception is convincing you that God is absent. But when Psalm 27 takes root in your heart, that lie collapses, replaced by an unshakable awareness of God's nearness. The testimonies of those who have leaned on Psalm 27 show us that courage is not a personality trait. It's a choice. It's the decision to trust in a stronghold greater than yourself, to rest under the shelter of a God who sees your battles and goes before you. Divine peace doesn't promise a life free of fears attempts to creep in, but it guarantees that you don't have to entertain it. These stories of victory through faith are living proof that trust in God, as described in Psalm 27, is more than powerful, it is transformative. In the next chapter, we will rise to a greater calling, exploring how to stand firm in faith during life's inevitable storms. Fear has no hold on those who embrace the truths of Psalm 27, because faith, when acted upon, creates a shield that no storm can penetrate. The divine call, standing firm in faith during chaos. Life is full of chaos and unexpected trials, relentless uncertainties, and moments when the ground beneath your feet feels anything but steady. In times like these, the world offers countless solutions, self-help, strategies to control your anxiety, and temporary distractions that promise quick relief. And yet, none of these truly address the core of what's broken. You see, chaos isn't just an external circumstance. It's an internal state. It's fear running unchecked, doubt clouding peace, and the overwhelming sense that you are standing alone in the storm. But here's the truth. Psalm 27 boldly proclaims, "You were never meant to face chaos on your own. You were designed to stand firm, anchored in a faith so unshakable that no storm could destroy it." Standing firm in faith does not mean pretending the chaos isn't real. It doesn't demand you suppress your emotions or deny the weight of your struggles. Psalm 27 makes this clear. David, a man who penned the words of this timeless psalm, did not live a life free of turmoil. This was a man chased by enemies, betrayed by friends, and surrounded by dangers at every turn. Yet, in the midst of his chaos, he declared a confidence that defies human logic. "Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident." This confidence wasn't born from optimism or blind hope. It was born from a decision to focus on the God who never fails. The divine call of faith asks something audacious of you, to look at life's chaos squarely in the face and say, "I will not be moved." Does this mean fear will never try to rise again? No, but it means that fear no longer holds the final word over your life. Faith becomes your anchor, and God's promises become your shield. Standing firm in faith isn't about how strong you feel in the moment. It's about the strength of the one you place your trust in. Your security doesn't come from the absence of the storm. It comes from the presence of God within the storm. The core principle of Psalm 27 reminds us that this strength comes from proximity to God. David declares in verse 4, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." Do you see it? David doesn't ask for fewer enemies. He doesn't ask for the chaos to disappear. What he seeks is God's presence. Why? Because he knows that peace is a byproduct of proximity. The closer you are to God, the louder his truth becomes, drowning out the noise of fear and confusion. When David sought the safety of God's dwelling place, what he truly sought was the unshakable assurance that God's presence is enough to carry him through danger, enough to silence his fears, and enough to sustain his peace. Standing firm in faith requires a decision. Will you focus on the size of the storm or the strength of the one who controls it? The truth is, fear flourishes when your eyes are fixed on the problem, when your thoughts dwell on your own limitations, and when you rely on yourself to fix everything. Faith, however, redirects your vision. It reminds you that the God who parted seas, silenced storms, and conquered death itself is the very same God standing with you today. His power hasn't weakened, his promises haven't faded, and his presence hasn't left you not even for a moment. But faith isn't passive. It calls for action. To stand firm means to actively trust God even when you can't see the outcome. It's praying in the midst of uncertainty, meditating on his word when doubts creep in, and anchoring yourself in his promises regardless of what your circumstances tell you. Psalm 27 shows us exactly how to do this. When David says, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" He isn't merely reciting empty words. He is proclaiming a truth that he chooses to believe, even when fear tries to convince him otherwise. Faith isn't about erasing fear. It's about speaking God's truth louder than fear's lies. One of the greatest challenges in standing firm during chaos is the temptation to take control. Human nature loves control, makes us feel secure, even if that control is an illusion. But when you try to control what only God can handle, fear inevitably takes over. Faith asks something counterintuitive of us: to surrender, to let go of the need to fix everything ourselves, and to trust that God's plan is not only good but perfect. Waiting on the Lord, as verse 14 of Psalm 27 reminds us, is not wasted time. It is an act of faith, an acknowledgement that God is working even when we cannot see it. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. These are not passive instructions. They are a call to courage, resilience, and a confident expectation of God's faithfulness. Standing firm in faith doesn't mean the chaos will disappear immediately. The storm may still rage, but the anxiety within you can be silenced. This is the divine call of Psalm 27, to live in undisturbed peace, even when the world around you is anything but peaceful. Fear tells you that chaos will overwhelm you. Faith assures you that God is already in control of what looks impossible. To stand firm is to rest in the truth that the God who created and sustains the universe is holding you securely in his hands. Picture this for a moment. A tree planted by streams of water, standing strong as fierce winds howl around it. Its roots are deep, connected to a source of life that cannot be shaken by what's happening on the surface. This is what standing firm in faith looks like. Chaos may come, but it cannot uproot you when you are grounded in the unchanging promises of Psalm 27. This divine call isn't just an invitation, it's a challenge. Will you let chaos dictate your steps, or will you plant yourself in the truth of God's word? The next time fear or uncertainty tries to sink your spirit, remember the closing words of Psalm 27. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Let this be your anthem. Let this be your posture. In the final chapter, we will bring everything together, uncovering how you can not only stand firm, but thrive in the peace that comes from living a life built on faith. Thriving in peace, living a life built on faith. There is a difference between surviving and thriving. Survival is reactive, it focuses on enduring the challenges and getting through them. Thriving, however, is proactive. It's about flourishing even in the face of trials, living with purpose and joy despite life's uncertainties. The message of Psalm 27 isn't just about survival. It's not meant to simply help you withstand the storms of life. It's an invitation to move beyond a life dominated by fear into one deeply rooted in divine peace, a peace that empowers you to thrive. Thriving in peace begins with the choice to live intentionally in God's presence. David understood this in a profound way when he wrote, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life." This request reveals the heart of thriving. It isn't about perfect circumstances or a life free of hardship. It's about centering your life entirely around God's presence. To thrive is to make this your ultimate goal, every decision, every thought, every step oriented toward a deeper relationship with Him. Dwelling in His house isn't just physical, it's a spiritual mindset, a constant awareness of God's nearness and dependence on Him for strength. But what does it mean to truly thrive in peace? Thriving doesn't mean the chaos disappears, nor does it mean you'll never experience fear again. Rather, it means fear no longer has the authority to rule over your life. Thriving is when peace becomes your default setting, no matter what's happening around you. Picture yourself walking through a storm, not hurried, not frantic, but steady, secure, and unbothered because you know who holds your hand. Psalm 27 reminds us that this kind of life is available to everyone who chooses faith over fear, trust over anxiety, and surrender over striving. Thriving begins with trust. You cannot thrive in peace if you are constantly battling for control. To thrive is to rest in the knowledge that God is fighting your battles, even the ones you cannot see. David captures this beautifully when he writes, "For in the day of trouble he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock." The imagery here is breathtaking. God doesn't just protect you, he lifts you above the chaos. He sets you high upon a rock, a position of victory and perspective, where the winds and waves of the storm can no longer reach you. Thriving begins when you stop asking, "How can I protect myself?" and start declaring, "God is my refuge and my stronghold." Another essential aspect of thriving in peace is gratitude. Gratitude shifts your focus from what is missing to what is already present. It reminds you that, even in seasons of trial, God's goodness is still evident. David demonstrates this with his joyful declaration, "I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord." Gratitude transforms your heart because it forces you to engage with God's provision. Fear thrives in an atmosphere of scarcity, constantly convincing you that you don't have enough time, enough strength, enough resources. But gratitude flips the narrative, affirming that in God you already have more than enough. Thriving means choosing praise, even when the battle isn't over, because you are confident in what God is doing both in and through you. To thrive in peace is also to embrace waiting. In a culture that glorifies speed and instant results, waiting feels counterproductive. But Psalm 27 closes by reminding us that waiting on God is not weakness. It's one of the strongest acts of faith we can engage in. David writes, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord." Thriving involves patience, a kind of restful anticipation that doesn't rely on the immediate resolution of your problems. Waiting allows God to shape your heart, teaching you to trust his timing far more than your own. It is in the waiting that God works most powerfully, drawing you closer to him and refining you for what lies ahead. Thriving also means living with hope. Hope is not wishful thinking or blind optimism. Biblical hope is rooted in the knowledge that God's promises are unshakable. When David declares, "I remain confident of this, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living," he is pointing to the certainty of God's goodness even in this life. It is this kind of hope, anchored in faith and grounded in trust, that allows you to thrive. Hope fuels your faith, lifting your eyes from the struggles of today to the promise of tomorrow. When your hope is secure in God, peace flows freely, undisturbed by the circumstances around you. Thriving in peace also comes with responsibility. When God plants peace in your life, it isn't meant to remain stagnant. Peace is a gift, but it's also a calling. As you grow in faith and learn to thrive under the truths of Psalm 27, you become a channel through which that peace can extend to others. Thriving isn't just about your personal relationship with God, it's about allowing that relationship to transform the way you interact with the world. When those around you see the unshakable peace in your life, it points them directly to the one who sustains it. David's joy and confidence became a testimony for generations to come. In the same way, your thriving is not just about you, it's about reflecting God's faithfulness to a world desperately in need of hope. Ultimately, thriving in peace is about full surrender. It's about saying, God, I trust you with every corner of my life, and truly believing it. It's about releasing the grip on your anxieties, letting go of the need to control outcomes, and resting in the truth that God's plans for you are good. Psalm 27 is the blueprint for this kind of life. It recalibrates your mind, equips your heart, and strengthens your spirit to not just survive the storms, but thrive in the midst of them. You are created for more than a life of fear and striving. You are called to live in peace, not a fleeting, conditional peace, but the kind that comes directly from the God who stands as an unshakable fortress for your soul. Psalm 27 reveals this peace is yours to claim. It's not distant, it's not reserved for a select few, and it's not dependent on your circumstances. It's here, now, waiting for you to step into it. So live boldly, live intentionally. Thrive in a life built on faith, knowing that fear has no power where God reigns. Fearless, living through faith. Fear is a universal experience. It does not discriminate and has no boundaries, reaching every life in one way or another. For some, it is a quiet voice, subtly influencing their thoughts and decisions. For others, it is a roaring storm, paralyzing them in doubt and despair. But fear, no matter how strong it seems, was never meant to rule your life. Psalm 27 offers a life-changing roadmap to break fear's grip and replace it with a faith-rooted confidence that not only survives challenges but thrives through them. This psalm is not just a collection of encouraging words. It is a declaration of freedom from the lies of fear and a call to live boldly in the truth of God's promises. Living fearlessly does not mean you will never feel fear again. Fear will always try to rear its head in the face of uncertainty, failure, or loss. But living fearlessly means refusing to give fear the authority to dictate your actions, your peace, or your faith. It means standing firm, as David did, and boldly declaring, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" Psalm 27 equips you to choose faith every time fear tries to creep into your mind. The words of this psalm are not just reminders, they are weapons to be wielded against anxiety, doubt, and the lies that say, "You are not enough." The themes woven through Psalm 27, trust, peace, protection, and hope align perfectly to call you into fearless living. David's words remind you constantly that your confidence is not grounded in yourself, your circumstances, or your ability to control life's outcomes. It is grounded entirely in the character of God. And who is God? He is your light, illuminating the darkest of paths and driving out the shadows of fear. He is your salvation, rescuing you from every enemy, seen and unseen, external and internal. He is your stronghold, a fortress where you are untouchable no matter what storms rage outside. Fearless living begins with realizing that your security does not rest on an unsteady world but on a God who is unchanging and unwavering. Psalm 27 doesn't offer a false promise of a life without challenges. In fact, it directly addresses the presence of enemies, danger, and uncertain times. David, as the author, lived through circumstances most of us can hardly imagine, from battles to betrayal to isolation, yet his stance on fear is crystal clear. Fear has no power in the presence of God. The chaos you face may not disappear overnight, but it is completely overshadowed by the peace of walking with God. Fear tells you that the battle is yours to fight alone. Faith, on the other hand, reminds you that the battle belongs to God, and He has never lost. Another core truth from Psalm 27 that reshapes how you live is the power of perspective. Fear always narrows your focus. It zooms in on the unknown, magnifies threats, distorts reality, and makes the problem seem bigger than it actually is. But when you take on David's posture of fearless faith, your perspective changes. Psalm 27 doesn't urge you to escape danger, avoid risk, or wait for perfection. It calls you to boldly acknowledge life's trials and then look beyond them to the God who stands above them all. David declares that even when surrounded by an army, his heart will not fear. Why? Because he is looking at God's faithfulness, not his own limitations. Fearless living comes when your perspective shifts from the size of your challenges to the greatness of your God. Anchoring your life in Psalm 27 also opens the door to enduring peace. This peace is not the absence of trouble. It is security in the midst of it. David describes it as dwelling in the house of the Lord, a metaphor for living in constant awareness of God's presence. Let this truth take hold. The God who created the universe is closer to you than your next breath. His presence isn't distant or fleeting, it is constant and available, and in his presence, fear cannot coexist. This peace doesn't just help you survive, it empowers you to walk into uncertain situations, face difficult decisions, and take leaps of faith with courage. You carry the assurance that you are never alone, and that changes everything. Living fearlessly also means living in hope. Psalm 27 doesn't just speak about surviving moments of danger, it speaks about thriving in the confidence that goodness lies ahead. David writes, "I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." That phrase reminds you that God's promises are not just for eternity. They are for here and now. Fear often convinces us that the worst-case scenario is inevitable. Faith, grounded in hope, reminds us that God's goodness is woven into every season, even the difficult ones. It allows you to walk through life not bracing for disaster, but expecting God's provision. But fearless living is not always easy. There will be moments when doubt whispers louder than truth. There will be times when fear feels overwhelming. The beauty of Psalm 27 is its honesty about these human experiences. This psalm doesn't deny the reality of vulnerability. David cries out for God's mercy, asking him not to hide his face. Fearless living doesn't demand perfection. It requires persistence. Even in moments of doubt, Psalm 27 reminds you to press forward, to declare God's truth, and to wait on him. Wait for the Lord, David writes. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. Waiting isn't passive, it's an act of trust that strengthens your faith and calms your heart. Fear will always push you to act rashly, but faith teaches you to wait, knowing that God's timing is perfect. Finally, fearless living is about impact. When peace takes root in your heart and faith becomes your foundation, your life begins to reflect God's goodness in a way that touches others. Just as David's confidence inspired generations, your steadfast trust will inspire those around you. Fearless living isn't just for your benefit, it's a witness to the world of what it means to walk in faith and not in fear. Imagine the ripple effect of a life lived in fearless confidence, radiating the peace of God to everyone you meet. That is the ultimate purpose of Psalm 27, not just for you to overcome fear, but for you to become a light for others navigating their own storms. As you close this journey through Psalm 27, take these truths with you. Fear is loud, but God's promises are louder. The storms of life are real, but God's presence is unshakably constant. Faith doesn't eliminate challenges, but it removes their power to control you. You were not created to live in the grip of fear. You were made to walk confidently, anchored in the promise that God is your light, your salvation, and your stronghold. Lean into these truths, Dwell in God's presence and watch as fear fades into the background. Live boldly, live intentionally, and live fearlessly through faith.